Welcome, Dr. Abramson. Welcome, Dr. Wright.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Why don't each of you first introduce yourself and tell us what you've been doing for the last 10 years, and then I'll go into questions. Dr. Abramson, why don't you start?
Okay. In the last 10 years, I've been in and out of litigation involving civil litigation against the drug companies for various for marketing excesses in various drugs where they misled doctors and misled the public about the safety and efficacy of medications. I wrote a book that was published in 2022, Sickening, that tells that story, and that's what I'm doing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Wright?
Yeah, so last 10 years, I was still running the therapeutics initiative and editing the therapeutics letter up until 2019 when I retired from the university, and I retired from clinical practice in the last 2 or 3 years. And so I've been living the retired life, but doing some systematic review work still. I'm still publishing some systematic reviews, and I still have some students that I work with, but I'm gradually doing less and less, but still very interested in the whole issue of prescription drugs and the impact it's having on the world. Yeah.
Thank you. So a little bit about this panel tonight. Dr. Abramson and Dr. Wright have an incredible amount of knowledge in an area that very few people have information. And in life, we all try to make our best decisions, and sometimes we make good ones, sometimes we might not. But we at least want to have the best information available to us before we make a decision. And if someone intentionally or not intentionally misleads us, and then we make decisions with poor information, a lot of us feel bad about that. In other words, again, we're willing to live with the decisions we make based on our own judgment. But if we're intentionally told things that aren't accurate, and then it turns out that because of that, we make bad decisions, that would not be good, and we wouldn't like that. So this is a very important panel because we are trying to understand, is there information that all of us have been told, all of us have accepted, all of us have believed, all of us have acted on that was never accurate in the first place? And that's where I want to start with. So Dr. Abramson and Dr. Wright, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions, a lot of them, so you don't have to fit everything into each answer, but why don't you both answer each question, or you could pass on one if you don't want to, if the other person answers it, but I'm going to fire away questions, and why don't you set the record straight on each of these? So the first one is, in your opinion, what is the single most significant way that the pharmaceutical industry skews the evidence presented in clinical trials? And why does this matter?
Jim, you want to take that first?
I could start. Yeah, it's controlled in many ways. They actually control the journals to some degree, that where the trials get published. They design the trials and they run the trials, and they for the most part control the data. And so we don't really know what the true data is in most randomized trials. And most randomized trials that are leading to drugs getting on the market are completely controlled by the drug industry. So they have many, many ways that they control the data that we have. and they control the information that physicians get. So and patients get. So it's a sad situation, but it's the truth, and it's the way it's been set up.
And it's been hard to discuss these things. And so thanks to you, Steve, for allowing us to bring these issues out that aren't covered well or are covered up well in our news and in our information sources. But I think the biggest way that the drug companies, to pick up on what Jim said about the funding of the trials and the control of the design of the trials and the financial relationships with the researchers and the universities, all that's true and very important. In my opinion, at the core of the problem is that the drug companies own the data from the trials, and they're very clear about it. I showed a slide from Pfizer in my first lecture on last Monday, that showed that Pfizer says openly that they own the data, they control the data, that all the studies have to be run through the marketing departments so that they'll be able to capitalize on the information that's produced. But the most shocking thing for me is that the data are not shared with peer reviewers or medical journals. So when we doctors and the public hear that there was a clinical trial and it was in the New England Journal or JAMA or the Lancet or whatever, and it was peer reviewed, we doctors are trained that we have to take that at face value and adopt the findings of, if we want to be good doctors, air quotes, good doctors, we have to adopt the findings of that are published in the journals and apply those findings to our patients. But what most doctors don't know is that when there's a clinical trial that's done, there's thousands and thousands of pages of information that are gathered. And that information is tabulated and it's put on an electronic form so it can be manipulated. But when the manuscript is submitted to the medical journal, only the 5 or 10 or 15 pages of the manuscript are submitted to the journal. The underlying data are not submitted to the journal. The peer reviewers cannot see the underlying data. And there's been no vetting of either the accuracy or completeness of that data. So what we docs are trained and must accept as scientific evidence is completely unvetted and controlled by the drug companies. And they're very forthright that their number one priority is to maximize their profits.
I hear what you're saying, but just right off the start, what about those of us that are saying you don't understand? My doctor is really, really smart. He's really confident. He's got tremendous credentials. He went to one of the best medical schools, and he's very articulate, and I like him a lot. And he's been with our family for a long time. So, what are you guys talking about? I love my doctor, and he's one of the smartest people I know. So you guys must be wrong. He knows everything.
Well, I think we're both right. I think your doctor may be a wonderful human being and be very smart and well-trained and 100% dedicated to bringing you the best healthcare that's possible. And in my experience, most doctors fit that description, not all, but most. The problem is that your doctor has been trained and become a member of this circle of expertise that has been trained to accept so-called evidence-based medicine at face value. And your doctor doesn't understand that the actual data haven't been independently analyzed by a statistician before the manuscript goes to peer review. So no matter how smart your doctor is, and no matter how dedicated and hardworking your doctor is, your doctor cannot get access to the data. And I know this very well because I served as an expert in litigation for 15 or 20, almost 20 years now. And my job has been to receive the corporate hard drives that literally the hard drives from the computers to receive those and analyze those. And that's the information your doctor can't see. And your doctor is probably a good soul and is trusting and believes that what the drug company says their data says is true, but it is often not true. And if I could leave folks with one message, it's that if we don't get this transparency issue straightened out so that medical journals must have independent statistical analysis of the complete data set prior to the manuscript going to peer reviewers, Americans, Canadians, global citizens are going to get ripped off by the drug companies who are willing to cut corners to maximize their profits. And the only thing that stops them is the risk of losing money by fine or by lawsuit. And so far, there have been very few drugs. There's been a lot of malfeasance, but there have been very few drugs where no matter how bad the drug company behaved, it didn't make money on the drug.
Yeah, I'll just follow up. Up until 1994, I was a practicing physician, and I was doing the best I could for my patients. But physicians are busy, and they don't have time even to read the journals. So even if they are very good and they're reading the latest trials, as John says, they're not getting the full information. But mostly they are not, and they don't have time, and they're mostly learning what they know about drugs from the drug companies. Most doctors are detailed by drug companies and accept that and like it. I mean, because um, it makes their life easier, and they like going to meetings, and the meetings are all sponsored by drug companies. So the knowledge is heavily biased by the companies. In previous to 1994, I actually worked with drug companies, and I was recruiting patients into antihypertensive drug trials. So I have the experience with what it's like to work with the companies, and they're very friendly and nice to you. But in 1994, I joined the Therapeutics Initiative. In fact, I took it on as a co-director. And from then on, we had a rule that we could not have any contact with drug companies. So no free lunches, no free gifts of any kind. And since 1994 till the present, Therapeutics Initiative doesn't allow anybody in the group to have any contact with companies. And when I did that, I also had then time to start to look at the evidence. And even with the fact that we don't have all of the evidence, we were looking at most new drugs that came onto the market in Canada. And we started to look at the evidence. And just to give you some sense of what we found is we were many times shocked that the regulatory agency allowed the drug to come on the market based on the evidence that was in the public realm and was published. So even the published data doesn't give you a strong reason to trust many of the drugs that people are taking.
So the question, though, is, does it even matter? So let's assume that the doctor recommends a drug based on information that was never vetted, that he never saw the real data. Once it comes onto the market, then the doctor sees if it works in the real world. So even if he doesn't have the correct evidence before, now he has the drug. He gives it to his first 200 patients. And doesn't that tell him once and for all whether it works or not? And therefore, it's not as important what he had before he started giving it to people?
Let me start this one, Jim.
Yeah, sure.
That's why there are randomized controlled trials, because you can't see as a doctor whether something's working or not. And I just took a deep dive into the issue of Paxlovid. and the efficacy of Paxlovid, the drug to prevent COVID from getting serious, if you supposedly if you take it within 5 days of testing positive for COVID. And the truth of the matter is, and the drug company has known this for a long time, that Paxlovid doesn't work if you've either been vaccinated or had COVID. They did a trial that showed that. They sat on the results for about 26 months while they were selling the drug off of their first study, which was in unvaccinated people who hadn't been exposed to COVID. And for those folks, it works quite well. But when I tell people about this research that Paxlovid for probably 98% of Americans is not effective, I often get the answer, well, but I know it works because I took Paxlovid and I got better. Exactly as you're saying, Steve. You watch what happens and people get better. But the fact is, when you do a randomized controlled trial, you find out that the people who were treated with Paxlovid, who were either vaccinated or are among the 98% who were either vaccinated or have evidence of having had a COVID infection. When you look at those folks and you treat people with Paxlovid, the people who have been vaccinated or have antibodies to COVID, it takes 13.8 days for people who are treated with Paxlovid on average to get better. And the people who were not treated with Paxlovid, it takes 14.1 days. In other words, 6 hours more over a 2-week period. So Paxlovid is virtually ineffective for the vast majority of people, but it looks like it's effective because people who have COVID tend to get better. It's not as bad a disease. It still can be bad, but it's not as bad a disease as it was initially. So what you're saying, Steve, is that docs can watch and see which drugs work. And sometimes there's a drug where a patient's experience is very clear. If you give somebody a pain reliever and it relieves their pain, then you can trust your observations. But for most drugs, you need to do a randomized controlled trial. And you can't just watch what's going on and draw conclusions from it.
Yeah, and you need ideally a double-blinded placebo-controlled trial, right? So placebo is very effective in many people. And so so many people, when they say they took the drug and it worked, are actually it would have worked if they had taken the placebo, which is a completely inactive drug. And it's essential that we do randomized trials to test all of our interventions in order to know whether they really benefit or not. And many of the drugs also have significant adverse effects, so significant harms, right? And that includes Paxlovid. Paxlovid has significant GI harms, and placebo does not have those. So anyway, so so you're actually causing harm when you give a drug when a placebo would be just as good.
Could you, since this is one of the main themes of your books, can you elaborate on the implications of pharmaceutical companies owning the raw data from their clinical trials?
Their job is to make money, to maximize the financial return on investment. That's their job. Complaining that drug companies are greedy is like complaining that leopards have spots. It's what they do, it's who they are. And I think that system, it has plenty of pitfalls, but it also motivates research and investment in new discoveries, some of which are genuinely beneficial. So I think where we are is that the drug companies are going to be as profit-seeking as they can, and we need guardrails. There have to be guardrails on their honesty and completeness, and the way they design studies. And those guardrails in the United States seem to be moving in the wrong direction right now. I noticed one of the participants that signed on said, we people in the exam room don't have much power. And that's absolutely true. The patients do generally, and the patients are in an inferior position. But I think the challenge here, and the reason why I'm here, and I think the reason why Jim's here, is to help to educate folks so that you can be empowered in the exam room, and you can engage your doctor in a discussion that may not have access to the actual data, but engage your doctor in a discussion that will lead to an optimal decision, the best decision that can be made. And one way to do that is to refer the doctor to the drug label. The doctor has access, you can share it, to the drug label, because the drug label, though it's owned by the drug company, it is a joint product of the drug company and the FDA, and the data have been turned over to the FDA. The FDA has seen what actually happened. So if you want to know how well a drug works, you look at that label and share it. It's section 14 of the drug label. I like to look up on TV, when I see ads on TV, I like to look up the drugs and see what they're talking about. There's a headache medicine that they've been advertising heavily, a migraine medicine. And I looked up the label, and it costs $100 a pill, $1,000 for a 10-pill package. And I looked up the drug, and only 1 out of 10 people who takes it gets better because they took the pill. Only 1 out of 10. So you're spending $1,000 for every headache you're relieving. Now, you can get that data. If you say to the doc, if the doc is going to prescribe for you a new drug or an advertised drug, you can say to the doc, let's look at the label. Let's look at the clinical studies section of the label and see how effective it is in the studies that the drug company itself put forth. So the fact that only 1 out of 10 people who takes the drug gets rid of a headache because they took the drug, that is not anti-drug company. That's the drug company that put that study there with the FDA's permission. So get your doc to go over the label with you about the effectiveness of the drugs.
So you're saying the data is actually available, it's just that it's not what makes it into the medical journals? Or are you saying, like, so doctors could get this information if they wanted?
On selected studies, yes, that information is available on the label, and it's trustworthy. In my first lecture, Steve, I was talking about the information problem, and one of the questions that was asked from the audience is, well, the label, that sounds like a great idea, but are there really legitimate sources of information? And that shows how much the value of the label has been covered up, because that's the most legitimate. That's much more legitimate than what's published in the New England.
You just froze for the last 20
Yeah.
seconds, John.
Yeah.
You've frozen your connection. Dr. Wright, to do.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's the same. Yeah, in Canada, you can get access to the product monograph. I guess that's what you're really talking about, I think, John, is
Yep.
and it has much more information in terms of the harms as well. So people, if a doctor is telling you you should take a drug on a daily basis for a long time, you should find out what the evidence is for the benefit and the harms of that drug. And that's what we try to do at the Therapeutics Initiative. And so for many cases, you could actually go to the Therapeutics Initiative and you could get a sense of what the true known benefits and harms of the drug are. But I'm always amazed at how many patients will not ever not question a drug or do any research into a drug and yet take it on a daily basis. It's really not a good thing to do, because it's a major decision that you're making when you start on something. And many of the drugs are never tested for any length of time either. So An example would be the antidepressant drugs, where they're all done in short-term trials, and the benefit compared to the placebo is very small, but it's statistically significant, and that's how they get the drug on the market. And then the sad thing is they don't do any long-term trials, and so we don't know whether the benefits outweigh the harms over the long term, and yet most patients are taking it daily for the long term. So those are the real serious issues. There are many, many drugs, I think, on the market, personally, in my opinion, where the harms outweigh the benefits. And yet thousands or millions of people are taking them on a daily basis. And we don't know that, and we won't know it unless there was an independent trial that was done to test it.
So just to clarify this, though, if the pharmaceutical companies own the raw data, what percentage of the time can we get the raw data by looking at the label?
You can get a little fractal of the raw data by looking at the label. The FDA, Jim, I assume it's this way in Canada, but the FDA works with the drug companies to determine which studies will have the results included in the label. And again, the efficacy studies are in section 14 of the label. When the study addresses the issue you have, that's the most trustworthy source you can get. You can't do better than that without a subpoena to get into the corporate computers. And I just want to say something. Jim is talking about the therapeutics initiative from Vancouver. That when people ask me, what's the best source of information? Is there anyone who puts all this together? And the answer is that it's the therapeutics initiative. They put together the best information that is available to the public, that is not hidden behind corporate confidentiality. So the therapeutics initiative, if you have a medical question and the therapeutics initiative has covered that issue, you're not going to find better information outside of a courtroom.
Okay, thank you. Also, everything you're saying, I know your book came out, 2 years ago. So is everything you're saying accurate as of April 2025? I know it was in the past. Has anything changed, or are you saying it still operates the same way as of today?
It still operates the same way, and the obfuscation gets more sophisticated, rolls along, and stays ahead of public awareness. But take, for example, I know a lot of people are concerned about COVID vaccines and COVID boosters. Our FDA is not requiring clinical trials on COVID boosters. The boosters are approved mostly on the basis of their effect on antibody levels, but not on their effect to decrease the risk of serious illness. So here we have the most important issue about new medicine and a completely new technology, mRNA vaccines. And in my read of the situation, the initial vaccinations were enormously important and saved millions of lives. Jim, I'll be interested in your opinion of that. But the boosters haven't been tested. And because we can't have this discussion in public unless somebody like you, Steve, comes along and says, you're going to open this up for the public, we can't have this discussion in public. The newspapers won't cover it. The news media won't cover it, that there are no randomized controlled trials. And if anything, I think it's getting worse.
Yeah, I agree. It's where there are very few independently run randomized controlled trials. When I practice in the area of hypertension, I'm fortunate because there were a number of large randomized controlled trials run by the Medical Research Council in the UK on the treatment of hypertension. But these were all done back quite a long time ago. And these are trustworthy randomized controlled trials. They're placebo controlled. And they demonstrated that in a select group of people with hypertension, that is, people who have blood pressure at rest in a clinical setting of 160 or over systolic or 100 or over diastolic. So that's what we would consider moderate to severe hypertension. And in that setting, when you compare it with the placebo antihypertensive treatment, mostly treated starting with a thiazide, was effective in reducing mortality and morbidity. And so in that setting, doctors can confidently prescribe drugs and know that the benefits outweigh the harms. And I'd like to be practicing it in that setting because that at least I knew that I had some evidence in that setting. In any other setting, we don't know for sure that the benefits outweigh the harms. So a lot of people with high blood pressure are being treated with lower levels of blood pressure, and that's an area where we don't have the evidence. And we're not, there aren't any large independent randomized trials being done for many conditions now, like there was back in that at that time. So there is a systematic review of pharmacotherapy for people 60 years and over in the Cochrane Library that I co-author that you can look at and get what is the evidence for that setting. But it's only a modest benefit. It's around 4% over 4 to 5 years. So that means that you need to treat 25 people for one person to benefit over that time. So even in that setting, which most people would consider very high blood pressure, the benefit is modest, but at least it is justifiable in that setting. So most areas that we're treating, we don't have that independent type trials evidence to justify it. And when you're looking at an area where it's all drug company trials, you have to be very skeptical that the meta-analysis or systematic review is giving you a true picture of the actual benefits and harms.
Thank you.
Jim, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Can you explain, in the United States, there was a brief period where the guidelines said that we should treat people who are above 120 over 80. And
Dr. Abramson, you froze
Yeah.
again, so
So I think he's saying there was a guideline saying that we should treat people over 120 over 80. We lost you there for a bit, John.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so that's not based on any evidence or any systematic review. We have done a review in mild hypertension, and at the present time in mild hypertension, that's 90 to 100 and 140 to 160. In that setting, there isn't enough evidence to know whether the benefits outweigh the harms for treatment. So even higher pressures, we don't have really good evidence.
okay, thank you. What role do medical journals play in perpetuating potentially biased information from industry trials, and what are the implications or impact on patients?
The big journals like the New England Journal and the Lancet, etc., They love for the drug companies to submit their big randomized trials, phase 3 trials, to be published in the journal. And they very much want those those manuscripts to be published. And the journal and the drug companies, when they submit it, say we will be buying thousands, hundreds of thousands of reprints, and you will it'll substantially increase your amount of money you have coming in. So the journal, so it's a very biased process, and they so anyway, the journals want to get them published because they know they'll be highly cited, and they know that they're going to get all this, generate all this money for the reprints. So unfortunately, the whole process is corrupt. It's not really a process that's designed to provide the best available evidence.
So the prestigious journals, the more prestigious the journal, the more attractive they are to the drug companies to submit their randomized controlled trials, because when the companies buy the reprints from the journals and have their drug reps hand them out, it looks like the doctor who you were describing, Steve, who's a hardworking, dedicated doc, when he or she receives the reprint and it says New England Journal or Lancet or whatever, that's supposed to be the truth. But as Jim was saying, there's an enormous financial conflict of interest, so that it's hard to get this data, but one study showed that for the Lancet in 2005, I think, 41% of the Lancet's income came from selling reprints of the clinical trials that it published back to the manufacturer so the drug reps could hand them out to the doctors. And the editor of the British Medical Journal, when he stepped down, Dr. Smith, said, it took me 25 years to figure out what was going on. But this, he didn't use this word, but it's basically a racket where the journals publish these commercially important articles, and then they make a significant percentage of their money selling the reprints back to the drug companies.
But one more time, the raw data that the pharmaceutical companies own, do they give it to these top journals, so the journals, before they publish it, can see the raw data to see what really happened in the study?
No.
Definitely
No.
not. No.
Yeah, I was a family doc until I understood what was happening with Vioxx back in 2001. Vioxx was an arthritis drug that was supposedly advantageous because it was gentler on the stomach and safer. And in fact, it was far more dangerous. 50,000 Americans died from taking Vioxx, from having heart attacks and strokes. And the New England Journal had published the article that said it was better, which was a misrepresentation, a gross misrepresentation of the facts. The FDA knew that the New England Journal had, what the New England Journal had published was a gross misrepresentation of the facts. The FDA, the journal knew it, and it continued to sell journal articles to Merck to hand out, so they could hand it out. They sold 1 million. The New England Journal sold almost 1 million reprints of the false article that the New England Journal of Editors knew was false after a few months after it was published. And they continued to sell it. And there's a presumption of goodwill that is, we're suckers. And we've got to know that we're being suckers, that we've got to organize. People have, it's essential to understand how critical this problem is in terms of our health and well-being and our family's health and well-being. And we patients have got to enlist doctors, and doctors have to enlist patients. But this has got to become a popular movement. There's no other way that there's going to be progress.
I just asked you if the raw data that the pharmaceutical companies get shared with the medical journals, and you said no. What about, does it get shared with the very, very top cream of the crop ones like the New England Journal of Medicine, the Lancet, like the very top journals and the very top people at those journals? Do they get access to this raw data?
No,
No,
no.
definitely not.
Yeah. There was a movement around 2014-15 to increase, to make this data available, and for the journals to make this data available. And the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors sort of stalled and stalled, and they finally came up with this watered down plan that didn't say that the drug companies had to share their data. It simply said the drug companies had to say what they were going to do about data sharing. So I got into an article about an Alzheimer's drug that was clearly misleading. I don't know if it was wrong or not, but it was clearly misleading in claiming that the drug was better, that treating people with early Alzheimer's would be beneficial and would produce a significant slowing of the Alzheimer's disease. And when I looked up for what the data sharing agreement was, which is what the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors said had to be declared, the supplemental data to that article said the commitment to data sharing is that we will not share the data. And this was published in the supplement of the article in the journal, so that they can say it forthrightly, we will not share the data, and the world still goes on producing this information, so-called information.
So I understand that you're saying that the raw data from that the pharmaceutical companies own doesn't get shared with the doctors and doesn't get shared with the medical journals. Do they share it with the universities, the professors, the researchers, the scientists, with the FDA itself, with the media, with the government agencies? Which of the groups that I just named do they share that raw data with?
The FDA can get some data, but they basically have to request it, and they often don't request it. So for the most part, the FDA doesn't get all the data. So they don't share it with anybody, basically. The raw data, they hold it and they don't share it. The only times it would come out maybe is in a legal case, right? So in some of the legal cases, some of the data comes out. But even in those things, they try and settle it so that it doesn't come out, right? So it's only the people involved in the case that actually get to see some of the data. So they're constantly controlling people not getting access to the raw data. There's an example of a trial where researchers got data, and this was a trial of antidepressants in adolescents that was published, and it's called Study 329. And the therapeutics letter, we summarize that. But in that case, a group of researchers, 10 researchers, got access to the full data from that trial, and they showed and proved and published that the original publication had said that the drug was effective, and it wasn't effective. In fact, it was harmful. And so that study has been republished with the raw data being analyzed by independent investigators. And when you see that, you wonder how many trials out there are the same, that's what's published is wrong, is actually false, falsely showing more benefit than is real, and less harm than is real. So it could be highly prevalent. And it's a very scary thought.
So, Steve, I was involved in litigation around Neurontin, gabapentin, which was approved by the FDA for as a secondary anti-seizure drug and for the treatment of post-herpes neuralgia, after you get shingles, for the neuropathic pain after that is can last for months and is very severe. And it was approved for no other causes of pain. And I had all the data, and this is one of the rare cases that went to trial, so I can talk about it. Kaiser Health Plans sued Pfizer, and the bottom line is that the jury found that Pfizer had committed fraud and racketeering in lying or being fraudulent, let's use the right language, about presenting its information in the medical journals. And my report is accessible online, and many of the exhibits are accessible. And we showed not just that Pfizer knew that its drug, Neurontin, wasn't effective for neuropathic pain. The FDA was so clear that it was not effective that it wouldn't even allow Pfizer to file an application to get approval for neuropathic pain. And Pfizer, and I can tell you this because it went to trial, Pfizer did the right thing, and I mean that seriously. They hired 3 outside experts in pain control to come in and look at the results of their trials and show them the results of their trials to find out what they could do to get the FDA to approve it for treating neuropathic pain. And the 3 experts said, you can't, you're done, it doesn't work. And that came out in trial, and it's accessible if people search deep enough on the web. That trial was in 2010, and gabapentin, that's the generic name for Neurontin, gabapentin is still between the 6th and 10th most frequently prescribed drug in the United States. So the problem here, it's not simply that the data aren't available, that they're not transparent. It's that once an article is published in the journals, and once doctors start using a drug in a certain way because they believe in good faith that the evidence shows it works, once doctors start treating people with a drug, the data can't turn it around, because we doctors, we take great pride. We work really hard to do the right thing for our patients. And it's really hard to admit that we were snookered and we did the wrong thing for our patients. So when the information comes out years later, it's very hard to get a doctor to understand that they were hoodwinked.
What percentage of pharmaceutical drugs where the pharmaceutical company owns the raw data, does the raw data get shared with the journals and other sources? And as what the stuff we're talking about, what percent of drugs or what percent of prescriptions or drugs, I guess, what percentage of drugs is the raw data not shared? Just like we're speaking about. And what is this in most cases? In some, like what percent of the time is the raw data not shared the way we're discussing?
Over 99% of the time, it's not
For
shared.
commercially sponsored trials.
Yeah.
Okay. There's the issue of ghostwriting in medical literature. What is this? How prevalent do you believe the practice is today, and what are the ramifications?
Go ahead, John.
Okay. So there was a study that actually answers that question. It was a very clever study that looked now more than 3/4 of clinical trials, drug company sponsored clinical trials, hire contract research organizations to carry out the research. And a university may be involved, but there's a for-profit company that is working for the drug company that arranges this. Now, about 1/4 of the studies still take place, the commercially funded studies. About 1/4 of the studies are run directly through universities and not contract research organizations. So this study looked at the terms upon which the contracting offices of universities, the terms that they would accept from a drug company to do the research. And literally 50% of the contracts are done allowing the drug company to ghostwrite the article and giving the authors, the researcher authors of the article, the right to suggest changes, but not to insist upon changes. So literally 50% of the of the small slice of drugs that are actually run by universities allow the drug company to ghostwrite the article.
And many of the authors are guest authors. They're not, they weren't really actively involved in the trial, and so it's a sad situation, right? So it's written by somebody who you don't know, and it's co-authored by a lot of people who had very little input into the trial.
You've explained that drug companies do these trials, they control the data, and what they give to the medical journals is their summary, not the actual raw data. What role do universities play in this? And what role does the media play in this? And what role do the government agents play in it, and the hospitals and the FDA and the pharmacies? In other words, most of us think universities are the highest standard of integrity, research, intelligence. We consider science the purest, most honest, highest integrity thing. So what role is science, universities, media, government agencies, and anyone else involved playing in this whole process?
Well, it's a sad statement, but universities are now in faculties of medicine in universities now get more than 50% of their funding from industry. And so universities are no longer the independent sources of information that it once was. I've seen this during the time of my career. When I started back in 1977, I think it was very much not the case. But over the time of my career, the universities have welcomed money from companies, and so so university people now many of them are doing research in collaboration with drug companies, and I did do that up until 1994. So I am aware of how that works, and it is a way of bringing money into the university and into your and for your career, but it's not a way of trying to find out the truth. It's a way of you end up assisting the drug company in their goal, which is to make money. So it's unfortunate, but universities are not the bastion of truth anymore, I don't think. And in big, universities like Harvard are the same. I mean, they get a large amount of money from companies, unfortunately.
As the drug companies were taking over control of the clinical trials in the 1990s, the universities had to compete with the contract research organizations to get the research. So they had to accept the drug company's terms. The universities had to accept the drug company's terms. And a very forthright doc, who was deputy editor of the Journal of the American Medical Association, Drummond Rennie, said in the mid-90s that because the drug companies now have taken over the funding of the studies that go to the universities, he called it a race to the ethical bottom amongst the universities. A race to the ethical bottom, because they had to compete with the for-profit research companies. They had to offer the same research terms. It's a race to the ethical bottom. And the problems, we're just loaded with good, happy news tonight. But the problems are that the students, the medical students who are bright and idealistic and they want to know knowledge to help humanity, they get socialized into this system of corrupt knowledge and they become part of it, believing that they're taking the steps that are going to bring the best of science to patients. But it doesn't work.
How does the advertising of prescription drugs directly to consumers impact their perceptions and demand for these medications?
I think it's highly effective. Just and my evidence is just that I don't think the companies would spend the money unless it was working. And it's shocking how much drug advertising occurs in the U.S. And unfortunately, we get a lot of it here too. So the Canadian government could stop it, but they don't. And so if you watch an American channel in Canada, you get all the drug ads as well. I think in addition to getting people to go to their doctor and ask for drugs that are advertised, I think the companies do it to convince the public that there is a drug for every ill, and to convince the public that they should be looking for something to treat all of their symptoms. And so I think it adds to the whole over-medicalization that's occurring, which is particularly bad in the United States. And I personally think that that's part of the reason why the health outcomes are worse in the United States in both poor and rich people as compared to other countries like Canada and Japan, et cetera. So I think over-medicalization is causing significant harm.
And there's one study that came out within the last couple of years that really tells the story here. Somewhere between 1 out of 4 and 1 out of 8 new drugs are actually superior to previously available therapy. In the United States, it's very hard for doctors to know which is the one drug that's actually superior because we don't have any governmental agency that or an organization like the Therapeutics Initiative that informs docs about which drug is better. But this study looked at the marketing, how much money was spent marketing those drugs that are not superior to other therapies compared to those drugs new drugs that are superior to the old therapies that were available. And it turns out that the drug companies spend 3 times more marketing the drugs that are not superior to previously available therapy than they do marketing drugs that are superior to previously available therapy. So this shows the lie of saying that advertising provides this service of informing doctors and patients about new medicines that are going to be helpful. It doesn't. That's not its job. Its job is to sell drugs, and you've got to sell inferior drugs much harder than superior drugs. And as Jim was saying, they know what they're doing. They know how to their financial return on research, on advertising investment. So they know that investing in not superior drugs is going to make them money.
So that's helpful for people watching TV. So if you see a drug being advertised, you should be skeptical about whether it's an effective drug at all. So that's a useful piece of information, I think. Yeah.
Regarding the underreporting of harm outcomes in published articles, what strategies do drug companies employ to minimize the visibility of adverse events of harm outcomes in published articles? You're muted, Dr. Abramson.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. One way is to not ask the question about harms, so that out of 41 trials of statins, one prospectively inquired about muscle symptoms every 2 weeks. Only 1 out of 41. So when the experts say, well, statins don't cause muscle symptoms, it doesn't cause them because they're not looking for them. So that's one way. Jim, you want to?
Yeah, and they group them in ways that obscure what's really happening. They talk about effects that are 1 to 10% and less than 1%, et cetera. And they do everything they can to make it look like the harms are not that much different from the placebo. But it's all statistical maneuvering that they can use. And then they market it as it's been approved, and so it must be safe and effective, right? But there's long-term safety has not been studied, and there are very few trials that are designed to really look at long-term harms, which is just by not doing the trials, then they don't see it.
What are some of the key differences you've observed between industry-sponsored and independently funded clinical research?
Uh, Let me go first, and
Yeah.
I'll give a brief answer. There's an excellent example of that. There was a study called the Diabetes Prevention Program study. It was publicly funded, done in the 90s. I think it was published in 2002. And it took people who were at high risk of developing diabetes, and it randomized them to three groups. One was a control group. One was a group that got treated with a diabetes medicine called metformin. And one group was assigned to intensive lifestyle modification, randomly assigned to lifestyle modification. So you can't just do an observational study and look at the people who are exercising and find that they're healthy and say that make conclusions about their health, because they're a very select population. But this was a publicly funded randomized controlled trial, and it showed that the intensive lifestyle modification was by far the best way to prevent people who were pre-diabetic from going on and becoming diabetic. Much more effective than taking a pill, which was better than the control. That's a publicly funded study. To my knowledge, there's never been a study, commercially funded study of a statin that included a lifestyle arm that was designed like the diabetes prevention program. So there's never been a study that had three arms that randomized people to a control, to a statin, cholesterol-lowering statin drug, or to intensive lifestyle modification. And the reason for that is that the drug companies don't want that information out, because it's probable, we don't know it because the study's not been done, but it's probable that lifestyle modification is more effective than taking a statin. But because it's privately funded, the funders have absolutely no interest in designing a study that will best inform people how to protect themselves from developing heart disease.
Okay, could each of you take 1 minute to make a concluding statement on your thoughts on this topic that you want to leave us with, and then how would we stay in touch with you or follow up if we wanted to, if you have a book or websites? Dr. Wright, you want to start? Final thoughts?
Yeah, my message would be that we need more randomized controlled trials done by independent groups. And we could actually solve the whole issue around drugs if we had if there was a law that required all drug companies to allow an independent group of researchers to do the phase 3 trials before the drug gets on the market. That's entirely a conceivable thing that could be done. The company would still pay for the trial, but it would be run and analyzed and published by the independent group. And so then it would, if it got published, you would be able to trust that it was being done by people who didn't have a vested interest in the drug. So I would hope that something like that could happen in the future, because that would change the situation completely, and it would probably lead actually to less drugs on the market, because less drugs would actually be shown to be effective in phase 3 trials if it was run by an independent group.
Thank you. Dr. Abramson?
Yeah, so I want to leave on an optimistic note, because Jim and I don't have much good news to bring forth. Most of your health is in your own hands. And if people have the wherewithal to be participating in this conference and asking the questions that they ask, they are sophisticated enough to know that on the one hand, we've got all the problems, and Jim just summarized them well with the drugs, but 80% of our health is determined by how we live our lives. And let's not be seduced into thinking that taking a statin or taking any other pill is going to protect us in a way that's superior to taking care of ourselves. So let's take care of ourselves. Let's exercise and eat healthy foods and have good relationships and get enough sleep and deal with stress if we can't do that. And understand that medicine sometimes is essential, and we've all benefited from good health care. But that for the most part, it's what we choose to do that's going to determine how long and how healthy we're going to live our lives.
And Dr. Wright, how could we stay in touch with you? Do you have a website, books? Has there some way to follow up with your work?
I'd be willing to make my email available. I would recommend the TI website for information. It's www.ti.ubc.ca, so it's quite simple. And you can do a search on that website for information in the therapeutics letter and other sources. So yeah, so I'm still involved with that group. I'm no longer the managing directors, but I would recommend that group for sure.
Thank you. And Dr. Abramson?
So I published a book 3 years ago called Sickening: How Big Pharma Broke American Healthcare and How We Can Repair It. And in that book, I describe what I learned during 15 years in litigation, how the distortion of what we believe to be good science about medicine, how that happens, how it's perpetrated, how the docs are fooled and how the patients are fooled. And for people who want to understand how this works, I would recommend that you read that book, Sickening. And my personal email is johnabramsonmd@gmail.com. And I will answer questions if people have them.
I'm very appreciative of both of you. I appreciate you devoting your time and your life to share information that very possibly could make a significant difference in our health and our family's health. So really, really grateful to both of you. And I really love what you do, and that you've been so smart and diligent and brave to take this direction with your work and your lives. And so we are really grateful. If we could unmute the mic so everyone could thank you and appreciate your work and the time you've devoted to this.
A lot of
Thank
stuff.
you all very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
So
Dr. Wright.
informative,
Thank
so
you. Thank you, Dr.
interesting.
Abramson.
I don't
Thank you,
very
Dr.
good
Abramson.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Wright.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Dr.
Loved it,
Abramson.
loved